And so if you start to ask people to kind of pull out 4 or 5 different feelings that are actually all interwoven together, that helps differentiate and that helps them understand a little bit more of what's going on inside versus just lumping that into one big, vague word like bad.
Today on Breaking Bread, we're back with Brian and Amber, and we're going to finish a conversation that we started regarding emotional regulation or emotional intelligence. Particularly, we're going to focus in on the skills. You know, when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's all good and well to kind of have a definition and know I need to improve in that. But it's very helpful, I think, to distill things down to some points of application or maybe a skill set or some tools in the toolbox. I'd love it if we could provide some of that direction. So, Brian, where would you?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe a starting point just in general would be to think about emotions and being able to identify what they are and the intensity level. And if you know the intensity level, then that helps you know what to do with it. So, for example, just at a high level, to think of emotions on a 0 to 10 scale and breaking that into 3 categories: green, which is low or good emotion, medium being yellow, and red being the most intense. And I think that's at least a starting point that kind of gives you some framework to categorize emotions and what you need to do to kind of help you work through those emotions.
And I might even take the airplane up another 10,000 feet, Brian.
Okay.
In naming emotions. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And, you know, I've seen those pictures of 25 emojis, right? Faces, like, and sometimes that can be helpful too, because in my head, I'm angry, and that's it.
Right.
But maybe there's some hurt, or is there something there that I'm missing? Does that make sense, Amber?
Oh, for sure. And it is really easy to use very vague language around your emotions. So a lot of times, you know, you ask somebody, hey, how you doing? Fine. Well, what in the world does fine mean? And my fine may be very different than Brian's fine or your fine, Matt. Or, you know, ask somebody why they're feeling bad. Bad's a very loaded word. And so if you start to ask people to kind of pull out 4 or 5 different feelings that are actually all interwoven together, that helps differentiate and that helps them understand a little bit more of what's going on inside versus just lumping that into one big, vague word like bad or good or fine.
Language is key. I mean, I think language is incredibly powerful. It unlocks communication. It unlocks relaying what's happening. And so sometimes maybe just emotion 101 would be basic emotional terms. Betrayal, for example. Trust and distrustful. Or, you know, all of a sudden they have nuances that kind of unlock my reality. Whereas, to your point, Amber, I'm lumping it all up in bad.
Right. And in that, too, just being able to convey some of those nuances by, you know what, I think it's really frustration, or no, it's really anger, or it's hurt. And, you know, all of that conveys a little bit different, but also this reality that a lot of times there's multiple emotions going on at once. But again, like Amber, like you guys are both saying, that to be able to just put some language to that, and that language to be accurate can be very helpful. You know, even for another common, I think, just general term we use is just like low self-esteem. Well, that's not an emotion, and what do you do with that? Versus like, no, I feel hurt, then you can, okay, where is that coming from, and how do you work through that?
Right.
Where some of the general stuff.
Dealing with low self-esteem, for example, is way too broad to have any sort of diagnosis or have any sort of help. Right. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
It's much more complex than that. Than addressing a low self-esteem.
Right, yeah. And that kind of language that we can even use today just leaves people feeling like, well, it is what it is, and then there's nowhere to go with it.
Yeah, where does a person go for a vocabulary helps in terms of emotions?
Well, there are a lot of good resources on our website that kind of talk through different labeling. And to your point, too, once you have the right labels and the right intensity around your feelings, then you can pull out the right tools to use. The only thing you know how to use is a hammer. That's maybe not helpful.
Yeah,
but
where not everything's a nail.
Right, exactly. And so you need to be able to use different tools for different intensity levels of emotions, different types of emotions. And so that's all on the website.
Okay, so I like this. So I want to just trace this logical thought. We've said identifying what the emotion is and the vocabulary that is required. Then intensity. How intense is this? Brian, you said green, yellow, red intensity. And then I like where you're going with that, Amber. Then it's like, okay, now I'm going to find the X, Y, or Z tool for this. What would a tool look like?
Yeah. Just a general tool that maybe would be just very common for all of us that we all use to some degree would just be like slowing down, thinking, and taking 10 really slow, deep breaths. That would be an example of a tool that kind of helps give you some space to think, identify those emotions, and hopefully also calm those emotions a bit.
I think we've heard that before, taking deep breaths. What's actually happening in that? Because I think sometimes we can kind of roll our eyes at that type of thing and say, okay, here we go, take deep breaths. But there is something physically happening in those moments.
I mean, at a biological or scientific level, God's given us two nervous systems, a parasympathetic nervous system that is calming, and then a sympathetic nervous system that really kind of fires up when we're in danger or something difficult happens. And so when that sympathetic nervous system fires on, it can be really helpful, but sometimes with that sympathetic nervous system comes messages that aren't true, like there's no hope, or you're bad, or, this is really scary. And some of the times that's accurate, and other times it's not. And to calm that sympathetic nervous system down by deep breathing helps then re-engage your thinking and then better assess, if that makes sense.
So you're really saying your brain consumes oxygen. It needs oxygen in order to do its job well. And by breathing, you're giving it what it wants. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So another really common tool that we'll teach is using different senses, your 5 senses. When you get very trapped in your emotion, it's kind of like you go inside yourself and you kind of forget your surroundings. And so using your senses kind of helps you re-engage with what's happening around you. So it's very common for people to enjoy listening to music, and they find that can be really calming. So they put their headphones in, or sight, being able to look at old pictures that bring back happy memories or things like that if they're feeling upset or emotionally charged. Smell. People use oils or candles or different things like that they have burning in their home. Taste. Again, like a piece of candy or gum or something like that can be relaxing for people. And touch as well, using lotion. And all of a sudden you're smelling something as well as engaging with touch. Another way that I'll have clients engage touch is to use temperature. And a very popular way to do that would be to hold like an ice cube over a sink. And again, it's a way to, all of a sudden you're focused on another part. You're kind of coming outside of your brain and you're focused on like the here and now and what's happening in that moment. And so it kind of helps just re-engage the brain in a different way.
Yeah. And I think it makes me think, Amber, like how many of us, after we've had an experience, we just kind of go and replay that experience. Like, let's say you've had a difficult conversation with a roommate or a coworker. Like your mind moves out of the present moment into our brains, just replaying those experiences and using our senses to bring us back into the here and now. Can be helpful, again, to process through that and not just replay it.
Right. We've got kind of an example of that in our home right now. So we've got a 6-month-old, right? And I have found, as I've observed my family, that engaging with her is a very emotionally healthy thing to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In fact, it's kind of amazing how you can be angry and frustrated and even an argument and then stop cootsy coo, cootsy coo, and then get back into it.
Right,
you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
But it's difficult to cootsy coo and argue with another person or even deal with your bad day at the same time. It's kind of like, I think it's what you're saying there. It's like getting out of yourself.
Right.
All of a sudden, you've got to dump, kind of your own baggage down if you're going to engage with a 6-month-old.
That's right.
So I think it's really speaking to those tools.
And I think that's a really good point, Matt, that we do this in day-to-day life and usually don't even realize it. But there are times when emotions are really intense, and because we haven't done these things on purpose, they're just natural to do. We don't realize that, and I guess what we're trying to do is just say, you've already doing a lot of this probably, now just purposefully do this, especially as your emotions move into that yellow and red range.
Yeah.
It is amazing, like how our bodies have been created for regulation. And so we do have a lot of these tools, like I just mentioned, the senses. This is all built into our systems, and it's just learning how to really access that in a way that's healthy and helpful so that you can be joyful and helpful in your interactions with others.
Yeah. I was just talking with somebody who gave this own testimony. He says, I've learned that if I go to a different room, if I go to a different environment, all of a sudden that changes. Maybe oppression or this feeling of struggle or whatever. And I think it's speaking again to those senses, like all of a sudden your body is firing, giving itself information, fresh new information.
Right.
And what a powerful and really straightforward way to help manage emotions is like, okay, I think I'm going to leave this place now and go into a different room or a different environment outside. Those are really helpful. What other ones would you have?
So one thing that I guess a framework that I like to introduce to people is called Wise Mind. And it helps people remember that there's two sides to look at. Some people, just by their nature and personality, will get trapped more into like a logical mind, where you go into that space and you think of things more through facts and
like
reason.
Logical.
And then the other side is more emotion, like we're talking about, where your emotions start to take over and hijack your system. And everything is seen as truth through what you're feeling, which, as we're talking about, is so not accurate. And so wisdom can really be found when those things are blended together.
Right.
And when you can put those things both into action at the same time.
Yeah. Well, you guys are the experts here, but I was just talking to, I think, Ted, and he was talking about, right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and really how they do both of that. They together give you a good, accurate picture of the world.
Yep.
Separately, they don't give you necessarily the most accurate picture of the world. And so I think what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is sometimes you need to intentionally fire up the other side.
Yep. Yep. And for most of us, we have one of those sides can be more natural than the other. And just being aware of that, and at times that if you're the person whose emotion is really reserved, that's a good thing. But at times, people need to know that you're excited or that you're hurt, and to really let that loose can be a challenge, but it's necessary. Or the logical side, like if you're really raw emotion and that tends to rule, like bringing in reason and truth and those things that you can know is really important to temper and help you walk through those emotions.
And those might be friends or companions. So that's a yes.
Yeah.
That can help me think through the logic of this because I know I tend on the emotional side, or help me with my emotion because I know I can not be.
Right. And I think it speaks to just the body of Christ and needing to be around people who have different strengths and talents and letting them, point those things out, encourage you in that, and just see the value of both. And not spiritualize one over the other, which we can tend to do, but rather to see these as both a pairing that can be a good thing and balance each other and help each other.
I appreciate you saying not over-spiritualizing one over the other, because I think sometimes we can say that. We can feelings kind of have the bad rap. Right. You know what I mean? Like, you stop feeling. But there is something masterful in God creating us to be feeling beings.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a dynamic of life and of what living is that really comes into its own because He's created that way. And really, it would have to be more for His glory, right? Yeah. That we would have that feeling aspect.
Yeah. And one of the examples in Scripture that I think just really kind of confounds me is this Christ's reaction after Lazarus' death. Like He weeps. Yeah. But that doesn't make any sense. No. Logically, He knows what's going to happen.
His left side or hemisphere, right? I don't know which. I have no idea which hemisphere. But one of those hemispheres should have straighted him out, right?
Right.
But you're saying it didn't.
He knew it was going to happen. He intended it right. He knew it was going to happen in a few minutes, and yet He wept. He he felt the emotion. And I think to me that's such a powerful picture that, God knew the logic and the emotion, like He really hurt with those who are hurting. and what he knew didn't take away from that.
Yeah, that's a classic example of an empathy, right? That Jesus, no doubt, was connecting with the people in their sorrow. Wow.
Another tool or thought that comes to mind in counseling, we call this cognitive fusion, that we can kind of fuse with our thoughts. And what that means is basically that we treat our thoughts as if they're true or as if they're the most important thing.
That is my reality.
Yeah, that if I think something, it is reality.
Yeah.
And obviously the scriptures teach us to take our thoughts, it's important to consider those things, but if we see those as being the reality and that they rule us, it's a pretty dangerous place. And so having some distance from our thoughts can be really helpful and important.
Yeah.
To be able to recognize they're just thoughts. And just because we have this thought, that doesn't necessarily mean something about us, or it doesn't necessarily mean something about what's going to happen. It sometimes is just a thought.
Yeah. I think the phrase that we've all heard is, don't take yourself so seriously, right? I think it's speaking to that point, right? Where you realize that the truth of the matter is not within yourself, but the truth of the matter is outside yourself.
Yes.
And that allows you not to take yourself so seriously, knowing that you need to be informed with the truth that's outside. And we understand biblically that is Jesus and his word.
Exactly.
And the revelation of his word. That's the truth that informs what's inside of us.
Yep.
It's very easy to start making up stories in our head and to go down these different paths where I feel this, therefore it must be true. And all of a sudden you start running with that and you create this whole web in your mind of why this person doesn't like you, or why you're always going to fail, or why your anxiety is telling you you can't do this and why it's right. And none of that may actually be real and true. And so one of the things that we'll have people do at times is to recognize, what are the stories that they're weaving? And then, what is actually factual? What could be proven in a court of law? And again, that helps the person step outside of that web that they've woven and realize, okay, this is actually a valid fact. That's a feeling. And even though I'm feeling that way, that's maybe not going to last forever. That's not really true. And so you start to, again, separate out what's real and what's fiction.
And some of that comes, I think, we have the terms pessimism or optimism, right? Are you a glass full or a half full or half empty type of person? I think that's kind of what the wherewithal that you're talking about. That say, left on my own, I inflate certain things, or I deflate certain things, right? Because the air can be made in both directions.
Right.
Well, and some of us have pretty good imaginations. And so some of us, it's not a hard stretch to start going down some of these paths.
Yeah. It's amazing where your mind will take you when you get a certain look from somebody. And if you let your mind just run, depending on whether you're more kind of optimistic or pessimistic, you can make up quite a story.
Yeah, that's meant quite a lot.
Exactly. Right. And it may not have, and usually doesn't have any basis in reality or what the facts actually are. To think that we're the reason why that look happened it's a pretty big stretch.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes to mind, Matt, too, is just the reality that when we start at that high level, being able to identify the emotions that we feel, the reality is that almost with every emotion, there's a natural action that comes with that emotion. So, for example, if you're scared, you would maybe run away. Right. So, and those actions that come along with those emotions are certainly very helpful. But then there's also times that emotion may not fit, and we need to do what's called opposite action. So, if we walk into church and we feel the emotion of fear or scared, and that's telling us to leave, to be able to bring our minds online and be able to say, okay, my emotion is saying that this is scary or a fearful thing, but I know this is a safe place. So opposite action says I'm going to actually step forward to this thing rather than the natural response of just turning around and getting back in my car.
Yeah.
So another example would be when you're feeling really lonely and everything within you is saying
withdrawal.
Yeah, I don't want to go to this social event, even though I know my friends are going to be there and they're looking for me to come and I know it will be helpful and I just don't want to go. And so being able to push through that is doing the opposite action instead of what feels good,
Right.
of withdrawing and maybe staying on the couch that night, but rather pushing in and going to the event, socializing, and hopefully feeling more connected by the end of the evening.
Yeah.
It's another example of opposite action.
And we've already previously made the connection between our thoughts giving rise to feelings and those feelings giving rise to action. And you're really kind of completing the circuit that, you know what, actions often influence our feelings and thoughts as well. Is that probably what you're talking about? Opposite action simply says, all right, sometimes we have to jumpstart this.
Right. Right.
And an action is one way to jumpstart the right thinking and the right feeling.
That's exactly right. And I think that brings the tie into as well. Just as believers, we're called to be ruled by the Scripture and live according to what they tell us to rather than our emotions in the moment. So the emotion of anger is an appropriate emotion to have at times, but that doesn't justify behaving in a way that is hurtful towards somebody else.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Both Brian and Amber, I know, would like to encourage anybody to use our resources, and a lot of them are housed right on our website. I know that if they went to the website, one of the themes is hurts and emotions. I would imagine there would be some resources available there regarding this topic. Any special favorites that you want to mention?
So there is a article on self-calming skills, which references a lot of the things that we're talking about today and has some handouts attached to it. I think it's an article that Ted put together. And so, again, you can search on our website to find specific resources like this one,
And you could probably search self-calming skills, and it will surface quite quickly.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I guess another one that comes to mind as she's sharing there is I know Kayla Beyer and I did a Joy in the Journey podcast. That was quite a while ago, and it has some skills as well, too, that a little different than we talked about today and are packaged in a little different way. That might be another resource.
Yeah. And I remember that well, in providing some helps on how do you deal with complexity and difficulty while at the same time navigating life, not allowing that to rule you, I think was some of what that was about. So, as always, thanks, Brian and Amber, for sharing your expertise with us. We appreciate the information shared and the helps provided here. And to you, our listeners, thanks for being along. Thank you for your gift of time, and we trust and pray that this has been time well spent for you. As always, we direct you to our website at accounseling.org for some of the resources mentioned. Have a good day.